This episode of the Lawyers Hip Hop Happy Hour is sponsored by the law offices of Alfred Guillaume III, a boutique criminal defense firm located in Washington, D.C. The firm specializes in defending federal criminal cases. You can learn more about the firm by visiting our website at guillaumelaw.com. That's GUILLAUME law.com. Welcome to the Lawyers Hip Hop Happy Hour. On this month's episode, I had the privilege of interviewing attorney Christopher Brummer, one of the smartest people I know. Chris is a Georgetown University law professor. He's the host of an award-winning podcast called Fintech Beat, and he's the founder of Fintech Week in Washington, D.C., one of the most preeminent financial tech conferences in the world. Chris is an attorney in very high demand. He regularly contributes to media outlets such as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and Yahoo Money, just to name a few. Chris and I discussed his life's journey from growing up in rural Arkansas to now rubbing shoulders with some of the most important people in the financial world. We talk about how a scholarship he received as a young man that allowed him to travel to Germany and Namibia changed his life's trajectory. A truly remarkable story and a great interview. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Welcome back to the Lawyers Hip Hop Happy Hour. I'm so happy, excited, and just overall, it was so much joy to have my good friend, professor at law, attorney at law, Christopher Brummer here with me today in studio. How you doing, my brother?
I'm doing good. It is a happy hour.
But we are early in the morning.
Look, somewhere it's midnight.
Somewhere it's midnight. The mimosas will come out shortly. I know you have limited time with us today, so I want to get right into it. For those who don't know, Professor Brummer is a professor of law at Georgetown University. He's a financial whiz kid, as I like to call him, an expert in all things financial, particularly cryptocurrency. He's extremely highly educated, world-traveled, world-renowned speaker, and he's on my show, and I'm really excited about it.
My brother, I am excited to be on your show.
Oh, wait, I forgot the most important thing. He loves hip hop.
I love hip hop. Where would you get that idea?
Right. And
where would you get
fact,
this idea?
Those that are watching can see on his shirt, he asked me what the dress code was. I said, just come as you are. So of course, this guy shows up in a t-shirt that says pure hip hop nutrition facts. I mean,
it's like like a cereal box, So I got a little bit of fat, a little bit of flavor,
Right. That's what hip hop is. We're going to get into hip hop as we always do in our interviews in the sec. But first, I would like the guest to kind of, for the audience to know, who you are, what's your story, how did you arrive to be this famous, world-renowned financial expert that you are? I'm going to start off and kind of bring it back to the crib. You're from Arkansas, which you're like the only person I know from Arkansas.
I like to tell people here on the East Coast, it's a little funny because I say, when I grew up, to get to my mailbox, I had to either drop in a car or walk down a very long, non-paved road to get to my mailbox, and they just sort of look at me. And first of all, and I have to say, well, first a mailbox is
right,
and then just kind of getting there, But yeah, grew up in Northwest Arkansas.
Is that a rural area or is that more city?
It's like I guess today you'd call it like an exurb kind of place, but then I was in the suburbs of that area, right? So it's a college town. Fayetteville, Arkansas is where the University of Arkansas is. I grew up right outside of that area. So yes, when I would go outside, I'd see, cows and go down the road, and there were chicken coops in the summer. And so you'd smell, so I guess that's pretty rural.
Right. Absolutely. And you graduated from high school in Arkansas.
Yep.
And you ended up at Washington University in St. Louis.
Yeah. And even between there was really weird because I won a contest between.
What contest? What was it?
Well, this was a contest between the United States and like Germany. Basically, they allow kids from every state to represent sort of the U.S. So when I was 16, I went to Germany for a year.
And you speak German, right?
I speak fluent German.
And you speak French.
And I speak fluent French.
And your wife's a native French speaker.
That is true. Yeah, she has more passports than Jason Bourne. I have to sleep with one eye open or something, right? But that was really important, and that's a key part of my story was just getting this, this kid from Arkansas, and then waking up one day and being like, I'm in Germany. And nobody, back then this was before, the internet,
right,
and
exactly.
telephone calls. So it's no one was speaking English.
And you're 47 years old, right?
I'm 47 years old.
Right.
Yeah. So old enough to pre-exist the internet.
Internet, exactly.
Yeah.
So you end up at Washington University, you graduate with honors, and you go to the Ivy League law school, Columbia. In New York City.
Yeah. Well, I get my PhD first.
Oh, I thought that was second.
No. It was like, I went to Chicago first, and I was like, like Germany. Like my old host dad used to talk about, the German colonies. And I was like, there are colonies? Germany had colonies?
Right,
and I
Namibia, right?
Namibia, exactly.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I pull it out every once in a while.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, Namibia and even when it comes to like what was happening in South Africa at the time in the Boer War, there are like concentration camps, which I did not know. And
I think this is the first time I'm hearing about that.
Yeah, and then in Namibia, the Germans sort of saw what was happening in the Boer War, and so you sort of see the migration of that concept to what we'd ultimately see in the Holocaust. But a lot of those ideas were tested out at first in Southern Africa, and I just found that really, really, really interesting. And so I actually got like a PhD first.
So you just gave us a whole lot to unpack, which I'm not smart enough to unpack, so I'm not going to really get into it. But you went from Washington University to another well-respected school, University of Chicago. You got a PhD, so you're actually Dr. Chris Brummer.
I am.
And then you went to Columbia Law School.
Yeah.
And got a JD.
Yeah. And
then you got barred in New York, correct?
Correct.
So you a practicing attorney, you had a PhD, all coming from rural Arkansas.
All from, yeah.
I mean, that to me is the American dream. I mean, you're an embodiment of the American dream. African American, from two African American parents who I'm assuming were descended from slaves.
Both, very much. Virginia and Kentucky.
Right.
Yeah.
And you made it not only to Germany and all these other places, but you went to the most prestigious institutions in the United States. And not only did you go there, you excelled there.
I was blessed, man. Right place, right time, right opportunity. And you understand. Luck is important. Preparation essential.
That was my next question. Like, what was the key to you succeeding at these places? How I don't know, but I'm just assuming that many of your classmates were not from the same background as you were, either maybe in the same race or even the same culturally.
Oh yeah,
how was that?
Yeah, it was like 99. It's really this was like it was rural Arkansas back in the 80s, right? So this is before all the trends that have really transformed the country. So it was like overwhelmingly white, right?
So you end up in St.
But it was like different kind of white, right? It was like cowboy white. You know? It was like, literally like chewing tobacco and that kind of stuff. So.
And you end up in St. Louis, Chicago, New York City, each city bigger than the last. So you kept going from one big city to another. And then you end up in the mecca of big cities in New York. Coming from the background that you came from, how were you able to successfully navigate that?
You know what? I think that an essential part of my own personal success was being scared, right? Wow. So, I would, even when I was over in St. Louis, over at Washington University, I'd see these kids with this, lots of New Yorkers, that New York swagger coming through. Right. And I'm like, I'm just happy to be here.
Right.
It's like, I'm just happy to be here, right? And you put that on steroids when you get to New York City and then you're over at Columbia, right? Because these are kids. When I went to law school, I'd spent my time getting my PhD.
Right, so you're a little older.
A little bit older, but
Are you like Doogie Howser? Did you graduate? When did you graduate from college?
No. Well, the PhD, I did pretty quickly, right? But what was interesting?
How long did it take you to do?
About 3.5 or
3.5 years to get a PhD. So you had to get a master's usually to get a PhD.
Yeah. So I went. I was focused.
Brother, you're being humble. I mean, who gets a PhD in 3 years?
So I was not an old PhD, right? But what was interesting was, depending on where you go to law school, sometimes kids go straight through law school. Right. Sometimes kids take a little bit of time off.
I took 3 years off.
Exactly, right? And so Columbia was a school where kids were taking a little bit more time off. So I was just a year or two older, but not that
you
much
weren't
older.
That, it wasn't yeah.
And but what they were doing in their 3.5, here I am thinking about, concentration camps in South Africa and everything. What those kids were doing at that point in time, so we're talking about 2004, some of them were like former investment bankers who were working, and then there was like the fault, from the original first tech boom. Right. And so like going to law school with a bunch of New Yorkers who had been former investment bankers.
Making
If
big
that doesn't
money.
scare you,
Right.
if that doesn't scare you, nothing will, right? And so, and they had all these experiences, and literally, I mean, I just worked myself to death. I mean, literally, like I was like, I will be the first in the library, and
And that's how it is for us sometimes.
It really is, and like at
all
night,
the time, actually.
in the library, like they're little, that's when the mice would start to run around in the library and everything, and it was just me and like
weren't gonna be
the foreign
outworked.
law school students from like or, different parts of the world, and we'd just be out there.
You would not be outworked, and that's
I wouldn't be outworked.
That's a lesson that I think it will resonate with a lot of people. So you're talking about German concentration camps, German literature, French literature. Your focus has been on that. And then you end up as a financial guru. How did that happen?
So when I was doing my PhD work, right, a lot of, I know it sounds crazy, but, I was both in Cape Town, South Africa, and also for the archival work, I was in Namibia. I was in Windhoek, Namibia. And in lots of different areas, I was looking around and I was like saying, I understand what sort of the causes of different problems are.
Right.
But then I'd go to maybe a township, and I'd say to myself, what you guys, this back then, what they actually need here are like stores.
Right, exactly.
And I said, well, for stores, you need capital. And for capital, you need finance. And I felt like I need a whole new toolbox, because I get, it's so important to know like where problems come from, but I didn't feel like I had like a toolbox for solutions. And so I did.
And you're talking about the descendants, not the descendants, well, the folks who have been affected by colonialism.
Correct.
That's who your focus was.
Like certainly being there and looking at history, it gives you this perspective of lots of people around the world who look like me or face very similar challenges. And then one sort of common challenge that you have no matter where you live, and again, when you get older and you're sort of looking at things, it's like, wow, if we don't master as a community, like finance and capital, and this is I didn't really get into tech at that point in time, just sort of finance. Like it's hard to have a lot of progress. Right. So I actually went to law school knowing that I wanted to get that skill set. I was very intimidated because there are other people who were coming from the banks, but like literally day one as a first year law school student, I knew that I wanted eventually to just bulk up on financial banking.
And prior to that, you didn't have any specialized expertise.
None.
That's amazing. And that kind of segues to my next question. It's like you're now a professor at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., teaching finance and finance-related things, right? What exactly do you teach?
So I teach financial regulation. So when you raise money, and this is something I always have to tell everybody, whenever you're dealing with other people's money, there's a rule out there.
Right. Which is what?
Well, there are different rules. It depends on how you're raising that money, right? Either if you're a bank and you're getting a loan, there are like fair lending laws. There are different kinds of rules that relate to contracts. If you're going to build a business and you do an IPO, like a stock, you want to sell stocks and bonds and everything, there are certain kinds of rules that relate to that. I teach financial technology, and
you also have a podcast about it as well.
Yeah.
What's your podcast? Plug your podcast.
Fintech Beat. Fintech Beat. It's where we go through all the kind of intersection between finance and technology, because once the internet comes along, the ways that you can raise money multiplies dramatically, right? And so I was, from crowdfunding to microfinance. Obviously now, when you think about sort of digital currencies and everything, that has opened up an entirely different sort of element to that conversation. So on the podcast, we talk about all those kinds of issues. But
and
that's
you
also
have
what
some
I teach.
Heavy hitters that come on your podcast.
Oh yeah,
financial leaders and global leaders.
I've had CEOs from the heads of regulatory agencies to Maxine Waters to you name it. They've kind of stopped on the show to kind of talk about it. Yeah,
that's impressive. And not only do you have the podcast, you also founded a week of festivities, I'm going to call it, in financial technology. Tell us about that. What is it called, and when is it, and where is it?
It's called DC FinTech Week. So it started when so many of your listeners, especially if you're outside of the Washington D.C. area, that sometimes it's kind of hard to get things done in the political climate that we're in, right? And so about 7 years ago, at that point in time, a regulator had sort of pulled me aside and said, Chris, we need basically a safe space to talk about finance and technology in a way that people will behave themselves. And I was like, all right, that's fine. Right. And so I kind of opened up a space over at Georgetown and was like literally in this like little theater hall. But it's like
it's gotten huge.
Oh, it's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, we had like CNBC, Campton, and like Bloomberg and C-SPAN. It was like, it's like eight years later.
This man founded it.
So we do that every fall. And I mean, we
I need to go to this year.
No, international organizations, like international organizations.
You guys throw any parties? That's all I care about. The parties.
No, I mean, like, some of the embassies, like sponsor events. So it's a pretty cool event.
Wait, am I invited? I didn't even say it.
It's free. And I wanted,
that's a no, folks.
Yes, that's a yes. You are absolutely invited. No, but like what's weird about the conference is, I guess two things. When you think about finance and technology, sometimes you can have a bit of a homogeneous crowd,
right,
and you don't have participants who always reflect the diversity of the economy, right? I mean, the economy is made up of all kinds of people, right?
Exactly.
And it's really, in my opinion, and I've wrote about this with our financial regulators themselves, who for a very long time were very homogeneous, to obviously like the investment bankers and the VCs, and like that if you don't, ultimately get people who reflect the economy into your conference is just going to be an echo chamber. So
right, that's wonderfully said.
So we try to get we're probably when it comes to a conference on finance and technology, clearly by far one of the most diverse conferences you will ever see. But it's also the quality is insane. I mean, like we have heads of central banks flying and everything else, but I still made it a point to make it free. And we don't charge anyone, and anyone can come in because you ultimately need to have people who have access to information, just like you need people with, I always say, like my goal, hopefully, is to enable conversations that help everybody have access to safe but cutting edge services, financial and technological services. And
it's
sometimes
really
we don't really
a noble statement. And one of the things before you go, I want to talk to you about with respect to that is you've mentioned without saying inclusion in that sort of stuff. African Americans historically, as you know, you've kind of alluded to it, have not had the same access to wealth, to finance, the knowledge. I mean, you're talking to one guy that I didn't know until I was however old that certain things were the way that they were. And you kind of figure it out as you go along. Whereas other folks who've been in this country for maybe even a shorter time, right, it seems from the outside looking in that they've mastered it. But yet we, African Americans, we struggle with those areas. You obviously are a dominant in that area. But what would you say, what advice would you give to folks who are feeling intimidated by finance and wealth and the accumulation of money and how to spend their money and what to invest in and stuff like that? I'm not asking for stock tips, okay? but just generally speaking.
But I got very, very used to the idea of this idea that if there aren't a lot of people looking like me in that space, then I probably want to be there, and I probably want to make sure other people are there too.
Wow, that's right? Awesome.
Because that means there's something going on.
Right. I want to know about it.
And I want to know about
Right.
it. I just want to know about it. And I think when it comes to finance and technology, I'm going to be very honest as I say, it's not even a political kind of issue. Like people, I've written about this, don't always want to have frankly, black and brown voices in certain kinds of conversations, right, regardless of parties. I'd said, like, when you look at the heads of the financial regulatory agencies, whether or not Democrat or Republican, the record is the same. In terms of the heads, it's like zero. And like I did all this data analysis in terms of who's writing the rules for finance and for the economy, like who literally is in the room when it happens,
right?
The
key is to be in that room, right?
And the key is to be in that room, right? And I think that one of the things that's required to kind of understand is like the choices in terms of the environment for creating wealth are written by rules. Rules determine who can do certain kinds of things.
Exactly.
And there are lots of different examples of this. Just a really, really simple example that's going on right now is like, to get into certain kinds of early stage investments, for example, there are something called a accredited investor standard. So basically, you have to have a certain amount of wealth, right?
Right.
Now, these are risky, and you can lose more. You can definitely lose more money, but that's where all the money is, right? Like in terms of the wealth creation, right? And so there's a certain kind of policy conversation about how much money should you have, or should there even be a wealth threshold in order to get it? And these wealth thresholds like $200,000 for an individual, $300,000 for a family, and then you start to get out your calculator and punch the numbers. You're like, okay, so you're excluding 95% of all African American families from being able to invest directly into the sort of higher risk, but also higher wealth generating opportunities. And when that happens, amongst other shortcomings in society, you can't be that surprised when you have more of a wealth gap, right? And so part of it is just kind of thinking through and understanding that there are rules that we may not know, but that exist in terms of...
And where would I find these rules if I'm just an average Joe and I want to find out some just basic rules and financial regulations?
It's really hard, right? Because I've written some of this stuff, right? I mean, seriously, like I've gone out to try to, we have, remember those little nutshell books from law school, that we have?
Correct.
These like sort of the For Dummies books.
Yes.
I've written one like fintech law, right? And to kind of like explain what some of these rules are.
What's that book called?
It's literally called Fintech Law in a Nutshell.
Okay, so guys, let's go. I'm going to get it as soon as this interview is over.
But that's just to say, like, the stuff that you really need to know is hard to get. But when we talk about financial literacy, three things kind of have to happen. A lot of times people are thinking about, okay, is financial literacy, how much do I spend versus how much do I save? And that's all very, very important. But part of the financial literacy has to be almost like a literacy about what are the emerging opportunities and what are the risks.
Right. So
that people are sophisticated enough and can kind of orient themselves around this idea of like, what should I be learning more? Because a lot of it is, honestly, you find on great podcasts, like for the really cutting edge stuff, you find on like great podcasts. And
as opposed to just traditional media.
It's not traditional media because it takes a while. Like whenever you have something new, it takes a while for somebody.
Once everybody knows about Amazon, it's too late.
And once they already know about Amazon, it's too late.
Wow.
Right.
That's really good advice.
But just also trying to check to the extent to see whether or not any mainstream financial players are involved in a certain space. You can, like say if you go to a Goldman Sachs or like there's these consulting firms like McKinsey and like MasterCard and Visa have like these empowerment institutes and everything. It's all free and online where you can sort of get an idea as to what are the major trends. But that is not it is not easy. And part of the challenge has to be pushing our government as well and the market to be more proactive. I have been there so often to fight for this because regulatory agencies are very often focused on keeping people safe, but they're not geared towards inclusion. Right. There's if you're only oriented towards keeping people safe, then you're going to say no to everything for portions of the population. But you're not going to
African-Americans
in particular, and you're not going to necessarily put any energy into thinking to yourself, instead of saying no, maybe I should be a little bit less lazy, and to think about how do I put conditions on things for participating in opportunities and getting people information about opportunities and also keeping them safe, right? But that's not part of their mandate.
So our government needs to do more.
The government absolutely needs to do more, and that push hasn't been there because historically there have been like no black financial regulators.
Right.
So
until you become one, right?
And I push, right now, there's a whole, for the first time ever, there are some people in government, but you also have to keep those black people accountable and all the regulators accountable because, I'll give you one last like simple little example. Minority banks, black banks, super important for the black community, like these critical anchors in our community where if you don't, they service people in their community in ways that even the JP Morgans or the Goldmans may not, because they know their customers, they know their clients, they've been in their communities, right? These kinds of banks, it's really hard for them to compete, right? The general regulatory conversation about those banks is, we'll just give them capital, we'll just give them some money so that they can survive. I'm sitting around and I'm thinking, I don't want these banks to survive. I want them to thrive.
Exactly.
And there's a big difference between those two. So I want to know what, a lot of these banks still use paper-based processes. I want to make sure that they can have their own app, that they can have a whole suite of financial services for mobile banking and be cutting edge to not only deliver better services for their customers, but I want them to grow,
right,
and to be able to scale,
and to thrive. And minority banks are so important too.
Because they are so important, right? But like, that's, believe it or not, that's not like a given posture in government, regardless of the politics.
And people with voices like you are helping to change that. Professor Brummer, I know you got to go. It's been great having you on. I hope to see you again as a frequent guest on the podcast.
Of course. Always happy to be back.
And I really appreciate you coming down. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Lawyers Hip Hop Happy Hour. Please subscribe to this podcast. It's available everywhere, including Apple, Spotify, and Amazon. New episodes are released on the 12th of each month. And if you'd like to see the video version of any interview, they can be found on my YouTube page at the Lawyers Hip Hop Happy Hour. Thank you for your support, and I'll catch you on the B-side.